Straight ahead on Law&Crime Daily. Britney Spears wants her conservatorship to end.
No more Britney being spoken for. No more Britney wants.
The pop icon telling a judge she wants her life back. And shocking photographs a 13-year-old saw of his own father before the teen was murdered. His brother breaking down on the witness stand.
I spent a lot of time with Dylan and helped him a lot.
Plus, how much time will Derek Chauvin spend behind bars? We asked George Floyd's family attorney, Ben Crump.
We've always wanted equal justice.
And the former Saturday Night Live cast member taking the stand in the Robert Durst trial. The alleged alibi now revealed.
If she loved you, it was like a juggernaut of love.
Law&Crime Daily, covering court cases from coast to coast. And welcome, everybody, to Law&Crime Daily. I'm Brian Ross, in for Brian Buckmire on assignment in Minneapolis for the sentencing of Derek Chauvin. And with me here in New York is co-host Terry Austin. And we begin with Britney Spears speaking out in a Los Angeles courtroom and telling the judge the conservatorship she's been living under for years has been abusive and she wants it to end. Law&Crime's Anjanette Levy is here with more on the dramatic hearing and what Spears fans are saying about it all. Anjanette?
Britney Spears spoke to the court for 24 minutes. In an impassioned plea, she said she's been forced to use birth control, and she told the judge, "I want my life back."
What do we want? When do we want it?
It's a day Britney Spears and her fans have been anticipating for some time. Spears speaking directly to the judge in her conservatorship case.
Britney telling her truth. Britney finally speaking. No more Britney being spoken for. No more Britney wants.
Spears described to the court what her life has been like over the years. She said she's not been happy and feels as if she's been working and paying people who tell her how she can live, controlling her every move. Spears even revealed she was forced to take lithium when her therapists and handlers felt she wasn't being cooperative.
When she said that her family was 100%, controlling her due to giving her lithium, that was a shocker.
Also a shock. Spears said she was not aware that she could petition the court to end the conservatorship or hire her own lawyer. She has been represented by a lawyer appointed by the court, and she wants to have another child, something her conservators are not allowing her to do.
And we finally heard what we've been hearing, rumors, speculations, allegations. We finally got the truth.
Law&Crime producer Jordan Chacon watched the proceedings.
The main thing that she wanted to tell us all, because we've been waiting for so long, is that in 2019 she wasn't honest with us and she lied. And she was basically saying, I had to fake it until I made it. She thought that, her pretending to be happy was going to be, something where she can actually transition into happiness.
But Spears is not happy and wants to live her own life, not as a slave to others. Her fans backing her all the way.
Now, Britney Spears told the court that her father and anyone else involved in this conservatorship should be in jail for hurting her and punishing her. That's exactly how she feels. Jamie Spears' lawyer later said that he is sorry to see his daughter suffering this way, and the judge thanked Britney Spears for speaking to the court and said she knew that it took courage for her to do so. She said she's also looking forward to reading future court documents that are filed in the case. Brian?
Thanks, Anjanette. Well, Terry Austin, now that we've heard these specific details, sounds like a nightmare directly from Britney. You think she might finally be able to get out of the conservatorship and get back control of her personal life?
Well, let's hope so, Brian. I actually understand why her fans are so sympathetic. For the past 13 years, she's been under this conservatorship, and she's managed to perform. She's managed to get all of this money, and she is literally paying all of the people around her and the estate. So I think if she can manage her own career and perform, she should be able to manage her personal life as well. Other people are in conservatorships and don't last for that long.
And Anjanette Levy, these details really do sound like a nightmare situation for her, and they point to the larger issues of this issue of a conservatorship system in general.
Yeah, I think that's right, Brian. And she actually said that she hasn't even been able to go get her nails done or use her own credit card. So the things that she said in court were incredibly disturbing to hear, that a 39-year-old woman's being treated this way. And she and some of her fans in particular, were saying outside of the courthouse yesterday that this points to a larger issue about the probate system, the conservatorship system. They say it's really impossible to get out of these. It's very difficult to get out of them once they begin. And these are really meant for people who cannot make their own decisions for themselves.
And Terry, very quickly, if it can happen to a rock star worth millions, it probably could happen to anybody.
That's right. It makes us think that we have to look at this system so that people aren't under the control of others for so very long when they could control their own affairs.
Absolutely. Terry Austin, Anjanette Levy, thank you very much. Turning now to more top legal news making headlines, Rudy Giuliani has been suspended from practicing law in New York State over false election fraud claims. A court is immediately suspending the former New York City mayor's law license due to his work as a counsel to former President Donald Trump. The court said Giuliani made demonstrably false and misleading statements to the court and to the public over voter fraud during the 2020 presidential election. Giuliani will have an opportunity for reinstatement. Antivirus software creator John McAfee has died. McAfee was in a Spanish prison awaiting extradition to the United States for tax evasion charges. Prosecutors say the Department of Justice brought cases against him and accused McAfee of defrauding investors of more than $13 million through false and misleading cryptocurrency. His cause of death in Spain is under investigation, but officials there say everything indicates suicide. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, we preview the sentencing of former cop Derek Chauvin. But first, a brother's anguish. What the son of Mark Redwine had to say about his relationship with his father and with his younger brother, Dylan, who Redwine is now accused of murdering. Welcome back. Turning now to salacious testimony in the Mark Redwine trial. He's accused of murdering his son, Dylan. His other son, Corey, testified that Dylan found disgusting photos of their father.
We had a very strong and tight-knit relationship.
Corey Redwine says he and his younger brother, Dylan, were not just brothers, but friends as well. Corey would later act as a father figure in Dylan's life.
Dylan needed someone to take him to practice, to play catch with him, to take him shopping, to talk about girls with him.
Their parents separated in 2005, divorced about 5 years later, and the brothers lived primarily with their mother. Corey described a trip they took with their father, Mark Redwine, to Cleveland on Father's Day 2011. Mark was asleep in their hotel room when Corey says Dylan found compromising photos of their father on his laptop.
He found pictures of Mark dressed in women's clothing, wearing a diaper, taking selfies of him wearing the clothing, wearing the diaper, eating the feces that was in the diaper.
Corey grabbed his phone and took pictures of what he saw. More than a year later, Dylan was on a baseball trip to Boston with Mark and asked Corey 7 times to send him the photos, but Corey refused.
Because he had wanted to show Mark what he had discovered himself. I was just worried about where Dylan was, and I didn't want any more confrontation with Dylan being as upset as he was in sending those messages. I didn't really want to send something more to fuel a bigger fire.
On Thanksgiving weekend, Dylan was visiting his father and disappeared. Corey says he was upset because Mark refused to help during the search, which was just 8 miles down the road from Mark's house. The following year, investigators found Dylan's remains and ruled his death a homicide. A grand jury indicted Mark for second-degree murder. On cross-examination, Corey admitted he he eventually sent those photos to Mark.
He said, "You are what you eat. Look in the mirror," right? Yes. Told him to, quote, "eat." Yes. Told him he was a coward, correct? Yes. Called him a eater, right? Yes.
Mark replied, asking Corey why Corey would want to hurt Dylan anymore. On redirect, prosecutors asked Corey how he feels about his father.
I still love him. I wish I didn't have to be here.
Family tragedy, Terry. It must be so difficult for a son to testify against his father. How do you think Corey's holding up under this?
Brian, it's got to be extremely difficult, but I think Corey is holding up very well. He was able to give facts and figures. He was able to give dates and places, so he definitely established the case for the prosecution. But you notice there when he's talking about family and relationships, he does get emotional when he's talking about his brother. He was actually more like a father to Dylan, so he definitely was very close to Dylan, so that was very hard for him. And it was even hard for him when it came to his father, because obviously a parent is always a parent. One thing I will notice here is the fact that Corey never said my father. He kept saying Mark, or he said Mark Redwine. So I thought that was interesting.
Absolutely. And Jeanette, how do you think the defense is going to handle all this compelling testimony?
Well, you know, it's certainly difficult. And those photos are something, once you see them, you don't unsee them. They have objected, the defense objected to the admission of those photos, obviously. They don't want the jury to see that. But they've also objected to even the use of the phrase murder when referring to Dylan's death. They've suggested that animals may have done something to Dylan, that he may have been abducted or harmed by someone else. So I think they're just trying to strategically pick some places where they can, you know, pull at a thread and raise some doubt in the prosecution's case.
And Terry, finally, I guess it really is in the end a circumstantial evidence case in terms of who killed him.
Absolutely. There's no real direct proof, so hopefully the circumstances will bear the truth.
All right. Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, a former Saturday Night Live star takes the stand in the Robert Durst trial. Plus, what George Floyd's family attorney is hoping for in the upcoming sentencing of Derek Chauvin. We look into how Judge Peter Cahill will make his decision. That's next. Former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin is set to learn how much time he'll spend behind bars for the murder of George Floyd. A jury convicted Chauvin of second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. In court documents, prosecutors are asking Judge Peter Cahill to sentence him to 30 years behind bars. His defense is requesting time served and probation. Attorney Ben Crump represents the Floyd family and says there's a simple equation for how much time they believe Chauvin should serve.
Whatever sentence George Floyd would have received had the roles been reversed and George Floyd put his knee on Derek Chauvin's neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds while he begged for his life, well, then that's the same sentence that Derek Chauvin should receive. It has always been about equal justice for us, because we are trying to send the message that all marginalized minorities in America want. The only thing Black people want in America is equal justice under the law.
Terry Austin, do you think it's likely Chauvin will make a statement before the judge and the sentencing tomorrow?
You know, I think it's a distinct possibility, Brian, and I think it would be to his advantage. Throughout the entire trial, we saw him sitting there, and he was very stoic. He was very, straight, very little emotion. So I think if he takes the stand, it'll give the jury to see who he really is underneath that mask. And it'll give him an opportunity to express some remorse. And I think that would help as far as the whole sentencing is concerned. And finally, Brian, I think it's going to give him a chance to explain why he thought his actions were necessary. I think that's going to be very difficult. I mean, 9 minutes, 29 seconds, that length of time is way too long, obviously, and it resulted in the death of George Floyd. But I think at least he can give some sort of explanation.
Anjanette Levy, you were there for the verdict, and as Terry was saying, Derek Chauvin didn't seem to show much emotion or any emotion during the trial after he was found guilty. It still will be a very tense moment for him now as he's waiting to learn how much of the rest of his life he'll spend behind bars.
Yeah, and it could be much of the rest of his life that he'll spend behind bars. I guess we'll find out tomorrow. But he just had a flat affect throughout the entire trial, throughout the entire case. And I think when the jury came back so quickly, relatively quickly, if you look at how much evidence was presented, he probably knew that it was going to be a guilty verdict. And, you know, this was a case that the evidence was out there before the trial even started for almost a year. So there was a lot of publicity around this, a lot of emotion. So I don't think it was a surprise when the jury came back after 5 or 6 hours of deliberation and found him guilty on all of those counts. That couldn't have been a shock to him.
And Terry, under Minnesota sentencing guidelines, for someone who does not have a criminal record like Derek Chauvin, the guidelines call for about a 12.5-year sentence. But here prosecutors are asking for much more. What's their basis for that?
Well, they're saying, obviously, the judge did find that there were aggravating factors, not the least of which was the fact that there were children present during this whole incident. And I think the prosecution is looking at all of those aggravating factors and saying to the judge, look, we think that you should give him more time.
All right. Thank you so much. Now to Florida, where a manhunt is underway for a suspect accused of shooting a Daytona Beach officer in the head. Police say the officer is in critical condition. The department released the officer's body cam video from 9 p.m. on Wednesday. The officer was investigating a suspicious vehicle when the driver got out and a scuffle ensued. The Daytona police chief says the driver shot the officer, then took off. Officers searched a nearby apartment and reported finding bulletproof vests, guns, and ammunition. The suspect has been identified as 29-year-old Otho Wallace. A $100,000 reward is being offered for information leading to his capture and arrest. When we come back, the latest in the Robert Durst trial. What forensic evidence reveals about the gun used to shoot Susan Berman, and what she confided to a close friend about her good friend, Bobby Durst. And welcome back. Continuing coverage of the trial of millionaire real estate developer Robert Durst, where detectives say they still don't have the murder weapon. Durst is accused of shooting his best friend Susan Berman in December 2000. In court, defense attorney Dick DeGuerin brought out the .22 caliber gun Durst has admitted he used to shoot his Texas neighbor, Morris Black. Durst also admits to owning a 9mm gun, the same type of weapon believed to have been used to shoot Susan Berman. But on cross-examination, a now-retired detective confirmed that Durst's gun was not the same gun that killed Susan Berman.
9mm that he was arrested with, and the shell, and you got it compared by a ballistics expert, right?
Yes.
And the result was that gun was not the gun that fired that bullet. There's no evidence that that gun was the gun that fired that bullet.
He wrote it up as inconclusive in Pasadena.
Right. And you've tested it since then, haven't you?
I had Gary Jones fly the gun out here to Los Angeles where we had it tested by our firearms.
By your own people, and it was negative, wasn't it?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Next up on the witness stand was Lorraine Newman, a familiar name, a close friend of Susan Berman. And Newman was one of the original cast members of Saturday Night Live. She's best known for her character, Connie Conehead. However, there was nothing funny when she testified that Susan Berman confided in her that she had provided an alibi for Durst when Durst's wife disappeared.
Susan told me that she had provided an alibi for him, for Bobby.
Do you specifically, to the best of your memory, recall Susan telling you that she had made a phone call for Bob?
Yes.
If I were to ask you, how certain are you, not regarding the time, but how certain are you that Susan said to you that she had provided Bob with an alibi? What would your response be?
100%.
So, Terry Austin, if there's no murder weapon in this case, how is the prosecution going to prove that Durst was the killer?
You know, it's really hard when you don't have the smoking gun, so to speak, and you only have circumstantial evidence. And that's exactly what we have here. We don't have a weapon. Nothing that Durst might have had matched what the bullet was to Susan Berman. So that's not going to help the prosecution. I do think, though, that the circumstantial evidence is quite sufficient here. We have the cadaver note, and anyone who writes a note like this, and Durst even said anyone who writes a note like this is the killer. And he has now admitted to writing that note. So I think that that is in the prosecution's pocket. And I also think that we've placed him in Los Angeles during this crime. We know for a fact that Emily Altman said that he was there, and others have placed him there. So I think the prosecution is going to be able to establish that Durst did it.
They've taken quite a bit of time already. Still another 5 or 6 weeks for the prosecution at this point. Terry, are they making a compelling argument? Are they overproving the case?
You know, I do think Lewin and the prosecution team in general, they have made compelling arguments, and I think the jury is probably convinced at this point. The real question is whether or not Lewin is getting on the nerves of the jury, because each and every witness takes so long for every point, and Lewin continues to pressure them to admit certain things. So I think on the one hand, he's gotten all the facts in, and he's done that really methodically, and I think that has worked well.
All right, Terry Austin, thank you so much for being here, and thank you all for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we continue to discuss justice in America. I'm Brian Ross. Thanks for joining us.